I don't know if it was the teacher would just always say that, or then the other students would say it, but I just remember they kept talking about how hard fourth grade was going to be. I was terrified, and then I get into fourth grade and I was like, this isn't so bad. I'm good. But it's like, why do we do that? It just added all this anxiety, and I was so afraid of, what was going to happen in the fourth grade. It sounds a little bit ridiculous now, but that's what we do, a lot, and we definitely do it in higher education.
Hello, welcome to SquarePeg's podcast, where we share first-hand experiences of neurodiverse graduate students and faculty members to raise awareness about the importance of neurodiversity in academia. Hello, I'm Arash Zaghi. Today my guest is Nadia Kellam. She's an associate professor in engineering at the Fulton School of Engineering at Arizona State University. She is a faculty in the Engineering Education Systems and Design PhD program, and she's also the deputy editor for the Journal of Engineering Education. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Give it a listen. Hello, Nadia. Thank you very much for agreeing to be my guest today. And I'm really excited about this conversation. I've been looking forward to this for a long time, and I'm very happy that this is finally happening.
Hi, Arash. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm glad we could finally make it work.
Yeah, I'm so glad. Nadia, I'm excited because you can bring a wealth of knowledge in terms of your expertise in qualitative research and engineering education, and also your first-hand experiences, and also as a reformer in education. So we hopefully can talk about that, how you see education system as an insider and outsider, and your first-hand experiences going through the system and what can be done. Why don't we start by, you've given me some feedback already about how you feel about the podcast episodes that you have listened to. I really like to hear more about what your general impression was. Was there anything that was new to you? And also if you have comments.
I think I told you about this. So last summer, me and a colleague wrote a grant around faculty with ADHD. And when we were working on the grant and doing the literature review, there was almost nothing about even just faculty broadly with ADHD. There were a few articles that we found, one that was sort of people reflecting on their own experiences as being faculty with ADHD. But it started to make me wonder if people were afraid to disclose their identities or disclose that they have ADHD. In academia, I think there's this pressure to be like perfect and be this ideal faculty member, and just performing top notch in research and in teaching and in service, and that you don't want to appear weak, to anyone else or have anyone sort of doubt your expertise or your competencies. So through that, I guess I was excited when your podcast started up, because it started to open up this conversation with people and gave people an opportunity to share their own experiences. So I was just diagnosed in the last year with ADHD. I don't know, I think before there weren't a lot of opportunities for people to share their stories and to help us sort of normalize this and these conversations, and so that people feel comfortable with starting to share things like this, so they can, be recognized for the superstars they are, but then also get supports where they might need them, in academia, so that they do well and they thrive in this environment. So I think that's part of what I was excited about.
Do you think that is the outcome of the same stigma that is around neurodiversity as, for example, our students in undergraduate, even K-12 or even graduate level feel? And that is essentially still something that causes its own damage even after you start as a professional.
Yeah, I think there is a stigma. I feel like we're starting to make some headway into using more of a strengths-based approach, into recognizing the assets that people from different backgrounds and with things like neurodiversity that they bring to the table. And so I think that's awesome, and I love that a lot of research is moving in that way, and thinking about funds of knowledge and what are things that people bring, from their own cultures and communities, even if it may not be the more traditional, top-notch schools and highest GPAs and highest SAT scores, but what are the things that they actually bring to the classroom that's useful. But I feel like we're not doing it with ourselves. And I don't know about you, but I was telling someone that was, an administrator or whatever, that I had gotten diagnosed, and you could see this look of almost like sadness or pity or something on their face, and I'm all excited because to me it's like I finally got this diagnosis that helps me make sense of things that have happened before.
Yes.
And helps it to me. It was just super exciting. I'm like, oh, this is something was always different or not quite right, but I couldn't quite put a finger on it. And so then this makes sense. And then this thing that happened, that explains it, like it all, to me, the pieces just all sort of came together, and it really helped me sort of reflect on my own experiences. But then to have someone standing there with that look of sort of pity or sadness. And so then I felt like I had to start advocating for people who are neurodiverse, which wasn't my plan or wasn't the expectation. So I feel like we have some work to do. Like if we're truly going to approach things from a strengths-based perspective, we need to do that with our colleagues and with other faculty that we're working with, and a staff and whatnot.
That's true.
If we're truly going to do that. And then I think that'll bleed into students and other interactions.
For me, my feeling was very similar. It was a very validating experience. Not that finally I found a solution for a problem. It was that things started making sense for me, particularly when I realized that I am also dyslexic. It made a lot of sense to me, like how I had so much struggle in certain classes and so other classes were so effortless for me. So, and it's interesting. We think we are supposed to know that, but no, I mean, like, because we internalize all of these things that we think are not normal or are not supposed to be that way. We don't process that until like another piece of information comes in, like a diagnosis, a conversation, or something like that. Oh, that makes sense. I am like that. So going back to the podcast, do you think that the style that we have adopted, the way we are doing it, which is heavily relying on personal stories, is a good way of doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think telling stories, I think that's the way that we can start to sort of change people's perspectives. And just as humans, this is how we learn. Like I don't need to have the experience of stepping into a fire or something to find out that that's going to do damage to me. Someone could have told me about that or told me not a story of when someone else did that and then they were hurt and this is what happened. So I think stories just at a really fundamental, basic level are the way that we learn from one another and experience. And so I think it's really helpful to hear people's stories, to hear their emotions, to sort of connect to people on that level, to really start to, have empathy for people and to just develop a better, more complete understanding of things.
Yeah.
Because even with, and I still, a little bit since the diagnosis, I was like, okay, so things were sort of different, but I still am not quite sure what it is like to be just not neurodiverse and to not have ADHD. I'm like, what do people not struggle with these things? You know what I mean? Maybe I need to listen to a podcast just about just normal people. I don't know. What does that mean? I'm not sure, because for me, everything has always been through this lens and this perspective of me, and I've always interpreted things according to that. So for me, I also just love hearing people's stories, and it's sort of my research trajectory has sort of taken me from, I was trained as a mechanical engineer and started doing engineering education research, did a dissertation related to engineering education research, and graduated in 2006. So that was right around when the engineering education departments were starting and the field was being born, or whatever you want to say. But I've pretty quickly figured out that the quantitative research to me wasn't so appealing. And it is biased also, the types of questions that you ask. And so I was getting back the same things that I thought I would get. So it seemed kind of boring to me. And then the more qualitative stuff, that seemed really interesting. And the stories, those are the things that really draw me in. And so finding ways to sort of analyze those and share those, because there is some danger to sharing stories if the people are identifiable and if it's about, being marginalized or that sort of thing. So trying to find ways to composite narratives, to still share stories, but do it in a way that protects the people, who shared the stories. So to me, I think there's a lot of value in that. And so I think podcasts are super important. Another thing from sort of the academic side, I'm co-chairing this committee on scholarly publications with ASCE, the American Society for Engineering Education. And one of the things that we're talking about, and we're actually trying to change the name to scholarly products, because I think we need to start changing the way we think about scholarly products.
That's amazing.
You know, in the past, we've mostly focused on how many dollars have you brought in, you know, how many research grants, how many publications do you have, how many, you know, peer-reviewed journal articles do you have. But to me, something like this podcast could have greater impact on communities than if you write, or say we wrote this amazing journal article that had a huge impact factor. Like something like this podcast, I think, could have a greater impact than a lot of journal articles ever would, or conference papers. So that's another reason that I'm excited about this medium as a way of sharing stories and digging into some of these things and trying to understand
I'm
the
very happy
complexities
to
and
hear
nuances
that.
of life, you know?
Yeah, I'm very happy to hear that. I mean, engineering education research community has been progressive compared to the traditional engineering program. So I'm happy that this conversation is happening. It's timely, it is important. Particularly, I mean, when you think about how easily now traditional, maybe synthesis research can be compiled with like all of these AI. So it's making like some of those research products that they used to carry a lot of value essentially kind of irrelevant, and also the need for making it more readily available to the general public rather than, for example, one issue that I think is slowing down this progress is we are relying on multiple layers of translators. For example, we publish these scholarly works and we wait for someone, a policymaker, to come across that and like translate or what kind of policy. So mistakes can be or misinterpretations can be made. So during the process of translation, and again, like considerations, limitations, restrictions, lack of resources, all of those, they, at the end of the day, what happens may be really far from what the intention was or what it was supposed to be. And cutting through all of that and really kind of like being able to talk to K-12 educators, high school students. When I say talking to, is like connecting with them through media like podcasts, essentially. I think it has value. It has even scholarly value when we think about that. It's not just outreach.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. And I think it'll take a while, I think, for the university to sort of catch up.
I agree.
But things like this committee that I'm on and co-chairing, like maybe that can be sort of a nudge in that direction. Because wouldn't it be great if on someone's promotion and tenure or on your evaluation or something that this was actually recognized as something, you know, as it should be, because it is a way that you're impacting the community.
Now that you brought that up, we can actually talk a little bit about the disease of academia. And then so, yeah, I have been a critical person from inside, and I think that is how it's supposed to be. Sometimes, I mean, I've seen people think that maybe I have to value traditions more, but again, like the society, we are in different parts of the spectrum in terms of how progressive we think about things or how conservative we think about things. I mean, like, it's not that this is good. We are supposed to all work together. Essentially, a conservative person has to work with a progressive person, so they make sure they don't go out of hand, and vice versa. So, but I think traditionally what academia values is contributing to the slowing of the progress. I want to take your opinion on that.
Yeah, I don't know, this is maybe a little bit of a tangent, but I had a student that was just doing their comprehensive exams, and they're trying to think about queering the Institute of Education, you know, and thinking about different ways. So part of me thinks that it's good that people like you and I are part of academia and are in the ranks so that we can start pushing on things and asking questions. Like, I think we have people, I'm sure you have colleagues, I have colleagues that are, you know, they did well in the system. Academics worked for them. You know, they got their PhD. They got tenured, they moved to full professor, they're happy, the system worked for them, so they think this is just how the system should be, like it's an ideal system. Whereas people like you and I'm making assumptions about you, but definitely I have seen issues, all along the way. I mean, that's one of the reasons I ended up moving into engineering education research, because it was hard. It was hard to be a student and to move through these programs. And yeah, I did make it through, but that doesn't mean that it's okay. We need to make changes. We need to think about, I don't know, like all the power and privilege that are sort of embedded into these systems and these structural and institutional issues that we have. And these are things that were intentionally sort of part of the design of academics and of universities, because they keep a certain set of people in power and marginalize another set of people. And so I think we do need to use our positions of power in these systems to start pushing on things. And like, imagine what this could be different. Like, how can we, like, let's imagine a future university. What could it look like? What would a university look like that, use a previous example, that values creating this podcast as part of your scholarly output? And we can go even bigger than that and really start pushing on some of these structural things that are just, it's the way it's always been.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of people just won't even think to question it. But I think coming with this neurodiverse background or other minoritized backgrounds or things about people, you see things differently, and so then we can start pushing on things. I think that, to me, that's the only hope that will ever change, is through people like us and others.
Yeah, because those people that they are very comfortable with this design, it's not that they don't necessarily they have bad intentions or they're conservative. It's just like they don't see they don't feel the urgency to change anything. I mean, it's working, so it's there, it's good. Like, so I mean, although it's very important that when someone brings up an issue, they keep an open mind. They do not insist that, like, oh, things are working. Yeah, it's working for you. But
one of the things we've learned is, so we've done some workshops and stuff around power and privilege with people, and you have to be really careful about the way you sort of present these types of things and the way you situate people into certain positions, because it can be that, like, some implicit bias workshops have actually caused, I think, more harm than good. And it almost pushes people into becoming defensive. And no, I didn't do that. I didn't mean to do that. I didn't mean to benefit from the system. And what we found instead, that it's better to be like, so this is the system. This is sort of where we are. Here are some stories and stuff to share with you of experiences that people are having in the system. We want you to think from an agent of change. Like, you're a change agent. You're someone that can do something to make this better. And through framing it that way, then you get allies and people that are like, oh, okay. And they start to notice some of those things that maybe they just hadn't noticed before that are problematic within the system. And so then you can have people starting to sort of transition and help get on our side to sort of make some of those changes that we need to make.
Yeah. And another reason that I'm excited about this change, again, if it happens, I think it's going to happen. Honestly, there is a lot of momentum that's building. I can see every day. And this Gen Z is not a joke. They're just so powerful. They're serious. I mean, like,
they're awesome.
They're awesome. So it's very interesting.
Yeah.
So for a while I was dismissing them. I thought it's another millennial, but no, they are different.
Yeah.
They are well informed. Is that by having those set of criteria, again, like intentionally, some of them are intentional, some of them are not. For example, like when they considered written publication as a measure of productivity, the number of publications, or for example, if you look at the process of proposal writing, the success of that heavily relies on how good you can write. I'm not talking about just the basics of the writing, mechanics of writing. It's just like a talented writer has a much better chance of getting proposals funded rather than like necessarily having a better idea, but you have struggles presenting it in a written form. And it's very important when we have structures like this to think about what segment of population are being excluded by those practices, for example. And so ADHD is one dimension, but I think the way academia is set up is more disastrous for those with dyslexia, honestly. If you think about the reliance on written product from the very beginning, that you put together your application package, you have to write multiple essays, and you have to have a list of publications. Again, like everything is written product, essentially, to get through the first round of screening. And then they're going to listen to you, how well you present, how you can use illustrations, animations, things like that. If you get to the shortlist and you make it to the shortlist and you're invited to do either a Skype or on-campus interview. Again, I have been talking to people about this, that this system is the best filter that could be designed to make sure those with dyslexia are excluded. And moving away from those traditional maybe measures or definitions of productivity will open the door to start encouraging those with like dyslexia, for example, again, to come to academia, and that's very important. I think that my own struggles as an assistant professor, associate, and now a professor are more related to my dyslexia than ADHD, honestly, when I think about that. And that's why I was so excited about large language models like ChatGPT when I started seeing that, like, I can meaningfully use this to get some support that I never had. And I can be just as productive as other people now. But I don't know. I'm just like...
I have a friend that is a psychologist, and she also is dyslexic. And she was saying the things that she did, like the workarounds that she figured out when she was in school, because she's like, if I hear things, then that works for me. But it's the reading it is really hard. And so I think she would even like read things out loud and record them so that she could then listen to them. And for textbooks, and like, so went to these great links. So it's kind of exciting. You mentioned ChatGPT, but it's exciting some of the tools that we have now that can also maybe start to help level the playing field. So things like ChatGPT, or even it's sort of basic, but just having the audio, and actually in a good voice or whatever.
Yeah. Hey listener, we are halfway through the show. If you're enjoying the episode so far, please follow or subscribe to the podcast. And if you have a minute, leave us a quick review on iTunes or your podcast app. It really helps others discover the show. Thanks for listening. Now back to the episode.
I like to think about in any class, like thinking about multiple modalities. And so writing might be one of them, but also could be art making or doing, like I was teaching sustainability to a group of second-year students, and we, instead of just having them read some things about sustainability or watch videos and talk about it, we had them create a stop-motion animation film. And so we could talk, so we had them focus on so we learned a little bit about it, focus on sustainability, then we had a conversation about it, and it was so much more in-depth and critical and thinking deeper about it. And so trying to tag into these multiple modalities, people learn differently, and when you can really get in there and get your hands sort of dirty and do these things, but it could be writing or doing a screenplay or, I don't know. Like, I feel like art sometimes is a little bit lost in the way that we teach, but I think sometimes we can get to a much deeper and sort of more critical understanding of things if we do engage in, if we do think about different ways beyond just a textbook, in a PowerPoint presentation or whatever.
I'm nowadays thinking more and more that content is secondary, honestly. Impression that we live for students is first. That is primary. Content is not as important as many of us educators think. What's your take on that?
So I have a friend, Joe Valter. He did his PhD in engineering education.
Yeah, I know.
We were faculty at University of Georgia, or we overlapped at Georgia for a while. And his dissertation research, I remember I talked to him, I think I had just become a faculty member and he was still a graduate student. And he was thinking about his dissertation, and he wanted to do this thing called accidental competencies. And it was this idea that he had, and it's just that, is that it doesn't matter, that like the Navier-Stokes equation or like whatever the thing is, like the content doesn't matter, that what really matters in the end is that students are really good at dealing at time management and doing stuff under pressure and, like these other more sort of professional skills that they develop, but that the content could be something totally different and we'd still turn out these great engineers, And when is it, even with us in academia, like how often unless I'm teaching a class that uses the Navier-Stokes equation, I'm not going to have someone ask me about that and regurgitate it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the content
exactly.
doesn't really matter, I don't think. But that does make, I think, people will not be friends with you.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that. but it's true, and like even thinking about, I don't know what classes you teach, but I've been teaching statics for a while now. And there's a lot, they're not going to retain a lot of that coming out of it and how to do truss analysis and whatever. But I think that's okay. I would like them to finish the class having like some confidence
Absolutely.
that if they have, or if they're faced with one of these problems, or if they become a civil engineer and they're designing bridges, that they know where to go and how to learn the material so that they can do it right. That's all I care about. And to me, the technical stuff is much easier to teach than those other skills, than those professional skills. But if we could teach, I don't know, if we could have graduates that are good at communicating and can share ideas and, I don't know, like are good at empathy and thinking about others and systems thinkers, like understanding not just how something works at a really low level in the technical stuff, but what happens at the broader level. What impact will this bridge have on the local wildlife? And, that are willing and able to ask those types of questions. What will having this bridge here do for public transportation getting out to this area of town, or whatever it is, but thinking about those types of implications of their work. To me, would be great engineers. And I don't care so much, about the details of
I love to
that they can do the method of joints or whatever.
hear that from you, but let me ask you what a counter argument I've heard that, how about prerequisites, for example? How about the next class that, for example, for you teaching statics, like mechanics of material that relies on the material from how about that?
Yeah, I don't know. Like I can't tell you how many students I've taught that I just put up like a really basic differential equation and they're just like, I can't do that. Like they can't differentiate. They can't. And I'm like, you've taken, like at this point, you've taken 3 calculus classes, like you've done, like you should know how to do this at this point. This shouldn't be something that's scary to look at, but it's terrifying. And so they've obviously had it. It's obviously been covered, in their classes many times, but they're still not coming out with it. So I don't know. So even when we do have those prerequisite chains, they don't work very well. So I don't know.
That's interesting. That's a very good answer. That it's kind of a delusion.
Yeah.
That we think that is actually working, because how many times I've seen students exactly in my exactly as you said. I mean, in my class, they have no idea that they have seen this event before. For example, I used to teach design of a steel structure, Euler equation, partial differential equation, things like that. It's like, okay, I mean, in differential format, I mean, it's like this Euler equation. I mean, like, and then I look at it and said, this notation, right? And that you had this course, right? And that's fine. I mean, it took me a few years to realize that no, I mean, they don't know it, and I have to accept this reality. And then I started asking, like, why are we teaching them then? And then it's just this idea that if we teach them this material, they're gonna retain it, and they're gonna forget that a week after the semester is over. So
it's this idea that there are these empty containers that we can just fill with knowledge, and it doesn't work like that. I used to skydive a lot, and I was a skydiving instructor, and my partner was also an instructor, and we taught a very similar first jump course. So that's the course that you take when you want to jump by yourself, but with 2 instructors. And it was basically like we used the same outline, like it was the same class that we taught. And then you'd have people, I've never heard that before. And like all I can figure is that they just weren't ready to hear it yet, because they were in the class. They definitely heard us talking about it, but they would just say things like I've never heard this before. This is totally new. This is useful. I don't know. So I think part of it is that, and like situating the learning so that they think that it is useful. So it's not just this like just in case model. Like at some point in the future, you might need to do partial differential equations, but if you're situated with a problem, and then you're like, I need some other way to calculate this, and then partial differential equations come in, and then it makes sense, and then you might remember it next time,
Yeah. But again, even then, the concrete knowledge of that is not reliable.
Yeah.
It is the impression and the emotions that are attached to it that is going to define how you're going to react. When I was an undergraduate student, somehow it turned out that like all of the faculty members that they were teaching classes related to environmental engineering. So I was a civil and environmental engineering student, so we had classes in environmental engineering also. They were not that engaging and to a good level discouraging. And I graduated with the understanding that honestly, the understanding was I'm too dumb for environmental engineering. So, and then later on, I realized, actually, they are using the same approach. It's the same, like, for example, like in structural analysis, we use disjoint, and like when they do design up like piping system, that's how the same way of approaching it. It's just same mathematics. And like, it's not that the mathematics was too complicated for me. I didn't have the background. It was the emotion that was associated with the title of that course that I still, when I interact with our environmental engineering faculty in our department, I'm self-aware that I don't know what they're talking about. It gets too technical. So it's very interesting after so many years and after like proving many times to myself that I can really learn independently. Technical content, as you said, is not difficult to really master. It is that impression, that emotion, that negative emotion that got attached to it, essentially caused its harm.
And caused major harm, over a long period of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of the research that I do is around emotions in education and emotions in engineering education. And it is, I don't know what got me started on it. Well, no, maybe not this. But there was this study that was done where people had lobotomies. And so they lost the part of their brain basically where they could have emotions. And there was this one man that was a lawyer. So it's the stories that you remember. This one man that was a lawyer that if you asked him any question about the law, anything, he could tell you the answer. He couldn't get up in court and actually make a case because he couldn't make decisions, and he needed the emotional side to be able to actually make use of any of this content or this knowledge or whatever that he had. And so this whole idea of like different sides of the brain, left brain, right brain, whatever, like it's not true. It's been proven to not be true. And like the emotions are a really critical part of cognition and learning. It's not separate at all. Like it's very much together and integrated. It's just the way we've thought about it has been separate. So I think you're right on about that those emotions that were elicited and that negative learning environment, or maybe even been like students talking about, this like organic chemistry class, you just have to dread it and have to be so nervous about it and whatever.
Yes. Or engineering is hard. How many times?
I remember that when I was in the third grade. I remember like fourth grade is so hard. Like I remember that, I don't know if it was the teacher would just always say that or then the other students would say it, but I just remember they kept talking about how hard fourth grade was going to be. I was terrified, and then I get into fourth grade and I was like, this isn't so bad. I'm good. But it's like, why do we do that? They just added all this anxiety, and I was so afraid of, what was going to happen in the fourth grade. It sounds a little bit ridiculous now, but that's what we do, a lot. And we definitely do it in higher education. Like this next thing is going to be so hard. Sometimes
it goes as far as traumatizing students, particularly for non-traditional learners. It might be detrimental.
You won't even give it a try. Yeah. You won't even go into that class, or the anxiety will get so bad that it won't happen.
Yeah. Some of the work that we are doing in graduate level, I have a project funded by NSF. It's under IG program. We are exploring the experiences of neurodiverse graduate students, which actually this podcast is kind of an outreach activity of that grant. We're looking at writing, for example, why there is so much anxiety about starting writing their papers, dissertation, and anything that has to do with writing. And think about that. For example, a PhD student in biology. I mean, like the way the system is designed, probably we can confidently say that he or she doesn't have struggles with the mechanics of writing. So otherwise wouldn't be able to get to that point. But the anxiety is to a level that I don't know even how to put together a meaningful sentence. So, and I've been thinking about that, and again, like that piece of the work is still ongoing. We are processing the data, but I expect that it has something to do with the trauma, with years of submitting something, receiving like very harsh criticism, and like that internalization of, oh, I'm a terrible writing is not my thing. That's how I think personally as someone with dyslexia, that writing is not a strongest skill of mine. And it's very interesting. Some people, they tell me that like, oh, actually you're a good writer. I mean, like, are you kidding me? And so like, tell me something. I mean, because that is a lie, you know? So, and sometimes I go back and read some of the things that I've written. Again, like, it's not easy ever, but it's not a terrible thing. I mean, like, yeah, it's not a brilliant piece of writing, but it's not terrible. I mean, like, my fear is disproportional, essentially.
Yeah, and I think, sometimes I think we're the worst at assessing some of those things, but the trauma and the harm that these things can cause, and it could have been just some offhanded comment that one of your teachers made when you're younger, you know.
And it is always like that, honestly.
Yeah. And those traumas are hard to sort of get past.
Do you have any experience that you can think about? I mean, typically we talk about your educational experiences, but I wanted to get to your kind of relevant experience as a faculty member first. But as a student, do you remember moments like that?
Yeah, I mean, I remember. I was in high school. I don't know what happened. Something happened, and I got annoyed with advising or something. And I think I was in the honors English class for my junior year of high school, and we had to read Moby Dick over the summer, and I just thought it was pointless and didn't want to and didn't do it. You know, I just didn't find it interesting. I think I tried to read I don't think I got past page 2. I'm like, I'm just not doing this. And so I dropped into the high whatever English class, and that was fine. And then the next year I got annoyed with advising, and I'm like, I don't care, just put me in whatever classes. Like, I don't know, I was just fed up with the conversation we were having. I'm like, just do whatever. And so I just sort of left, and they put me into classes, and they put me into, it was like calculus BC AP class, and like an English AP class, which I hadn't taken the honors. And the English I took, we didn't write. Like, I don't know, I definitely wasn't prepared for a AP English class. I don't know what the other classes were, probably really academic ones. And it was horrible. That English AP class was horrible. And I just remember the teacher I think she was getting really frustrated with me, but I just didn't know how to write. Like, I really didn't know how to write. And I would put all this effort in, and then even like reading things, and even now I love to read. I read a lot. But if you ask me right now, like, about the book that I'm reading right now, like, I can provide like a little bit of the story of what's happening, and I get into it, but I'm just not good at recalling, and especially not like, what was the color of the hat that someone wore, you know, during this scene. Like, I don't know. Like, to me, that's not an important part of the story. It's not something I care about or try to remember. And so I just remember I was doing bad, like, in the writing assignments, then also the tests on any of the readings that we had to do. And she would, like, her way of dealing with me was that she would just give me someone else's paper and be like, see, this is a good example. Like, this is what you should do. And that doesn't teach you anything, you know, beyond just feeling more like an imposter. Like, what am I doing here? And so I didn't do well on that AP exam. Not surprising. I did good on the calculus one, but I got to college, and I remember we were in just like one of the intro English classes, and my teacher was showing, like, on the projector thing, showing someone's paper, you know, and had marked out whose paper it was, and how they did a really good job of like connecting, it was like Shakespeare or something, but connecting these different books or whatever and making these connections and whatever. And I was like, wait, is that mine? That's my paper. Like, she's using my example as a good example.
Wow.
Like, how is this possible? Because I just thought for sure at that point, like, I was like, I'm not a good writer. I'm not a writer. I'm not a good English person. I'm not good at reading. I'm not good at these things. This isn't me. And I just remember being a little bit confused and shocked that she was using mine. I'm like, maybe I am good, it may be in different ways. It may be that I'm good at making connections between different ideas. And that sort of aligns with the whole ADHD thing. But maybe I'm not as good at like staying on point and writing a really succinct, 3-page essay on
rigid
whatever.
kind of template. And
Yeah.
Any other experiences that stands out to you?
Like as a kid and in high school, I always just felt a little bit different than the people around me. And so I think that led to some like feeling like a bit of an imposter. I definitely figured out pretty early on that I do better if I don't know if it's stimulated is the right word, but if I have a lot of things going on, I do pretty well. If I have a lot of time and I don't have a lot of things going on, then I don't do well. And I don't know if that's getting into like some depression, or I'm not sure what goes on with that, but that's something that I've definitely hung on to, and when I was an undergraduate, I was always working and sometimes waiting tables, full time while being in school full time. And so, but for me, I think that's almost better. And now I fulfill it with all of my tons of activities, it's a little, the things that I do for fun are a little bit ridiculous, but for me that keeps me happy and engaged and going on, so I can do those things and then I can engage deeply, with work. But if I have a lot of free time, I don't do so well.
How was your experience as a graduate student?
I was pretty fortunate as a graduate student. I did this as an undergraduate. For my last year, I got to do this GK through 12 program. I don't know if you remember it, but it was through NSF, and graduate students would go into classrooms like regularly and help teach science or teach different things. And they had some of the graduate students had dropped out, and so they needed some undergraduates to fill in the spots. And so I got to do that, and it was really awesome. I got to go into the classroom and teach third grade. I was at a sort of a wealthy school for one semester and then a really poor inner city school second semester, and that started to show some of the differences of resources. And I knew everything down to like school lunches, like everything is different in the two schools. And the teacher that was at the poorer school, she was amazing. And so then I got to see how the students were, with that. So that was a really sort of important time for me, and got me a little bit thinking, I think, more towards like research and engineering education, even though that wasn't quite a thing yet. And I ended up applying for someone that I was doing research underneath. She suggested that I apply for NSF GRFP, and I got that. And so that allowed me some sort of flexibility in my graduate work, which I think was good, because then I could like do projects and go work with someone, in this area and go do something else. And I had an advisor who was in the lab for sustainable solutions and mechanical engineering. And he was sort of towards the end of his career, but it allowed me to sort of manage the system over a lot of time, but to be able to do things differently, like do a PhD or do my dissertation in engineering education, even though I was in a mechanical engineering program. It took a lot of work to get, like, one of the things I figured out was it had to be his idea in order for him to get excited about it. So it took some time for me to make it his idea that I do something different. But we got there, and that sort of opened the door for me to be able to do things. It was really hard.
I've realized that I'm most creative and productive and impactful when I'm happy. You can box me and force me to do things, to kind of like finish papers after papers or write proposals, things like that. But the works that I'm proud of, the works that I think are most impact, like this podcast is being an example for that. The idea came to me, or the idea emerged when I was operating in my happy mood, and like it. So, and we're not valuing that much. There is some confusion between happiness and joy and pleasure. So happiness is just like, you feel that you're doing the right thing, you're content, you think you're taking the right steps. It's not necessarily, it's always fun. You can be very happy and you can be working stressed out in terms of the amount of work, but yet be happy. So that doesn't mean like happiness is not that you're in that kind of like luxurious resort, laying on the beach all the time. That's not happiness necessarily. So, but it's critical for creativity. That's what I have. If creativity matters, it's very difficult to get people to be creative when they are miserable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's something we need to think about. I'm a advisor for PRISM. It's the LGBTQ student group at Poly. I don't know, like I've been thinking some about, like neurodiverse students and queer students and how to better support them in the classroom, and even just being more compassionate in your teaching, in the classroom. And I was talking at their event at the end of the semester, I was talking to a couple of students, and they were telling me how much trouble they were having with housing and with gender inclusive housing. And it just made me realize, like, one of them ended up in a bad situation. Like, they did get gender inclusive housing, but then this bad interaction with someone that was in that, so they needed to be out. And it was like they were either going to not get housing, or they might end up being with someone that really didn't like them just for their sexual identity, And so, and I was like, it made me think, like, we're all worried about, and then they can't even get housing, period. And they're worried about where they're going to be living next semester. And I'm like, I'm worried about what's happening in the classroom and how compassionate I am and caring in the classroom. They don't even have a place to live or a safe place to live. Like, we're not even in the right ballpark. Like, we need to make sure that they have food, they have water, they have a safe place to live before we can really start thinking about, their ideal learning environment. If they're not safe in their living situation, then, like, why are we even doing this? And why isn't this a problem? Why isn't the administration worried about this? But I think at ASU we have this problem where we're just growing exponentially, and we just can't handle the number of students that we have. So we just don't have enough spaces for them.
Yeah, and this is something, again, like when we go to classroom, we think that it's only important that we are clear about the content and we have a clear schedule when assignments are due, or students, they know exactly what they need to read, what comes in 2 weeks. I mean, that's exact 99% of like what we think about when we prepare for a classroom. I was doing an outreach activity in the middle school, and I asked students, we had some extra time, what's your dream when you are my age, when you're in your 40s? And almost 70% of them said, I want to have a family. Back to back. I mean, like, I was expecting to hear, I want to become a doctor. I want to become an astronaut. I want to become this and that. And then during the lunch, I had a conversation with a teacher, and she told me that, not that it was connected, but it helped me to understand why I heard that 90% of the students that I met that day, they are single parent, living in a house that they're single parent. Exactly. For some people, the problem is not that, for example, like, this assignment is due and they missed the kind of deadline, or like this job application, how prepare for an interview. And we cannot be ignorant of that. Again, like, as a professor in a class, we cannot solve that problem necessarily. We don't have that power, or we don't have the authority or the training required, but we cannot be ignorant of that.
Yeah. And I get super annoyed with colleagues they'll do this whole, and it's the same colleagues that'll be like, oh, our students are so lazy. Like, undergraduate students are so lazy. I'm like, have you talked to them? Like, lazy is the last word I would use to describe them. Like, a lot of our students are, have families, they have kids of their own, they might be taking care of parents, taking care of elderly parents, they're working multiple jobs and putting themselves through school, really trying to level up. They are not lazy. Like, there's absolutely nothing lazy about them. Yes, maybe they, aren't doing so well with, submitting all their assignments on time in your class, but there might be a very good reason for that. But yeah, it just irritates me so then they're dealing, these students are dealing with professors who think that they're lazy.
Yeah.
And they can feel that. They know that.
Oh, absolutely.
They can tell. Because they can
Absolutely.
tell that they're not compassionate. They don't care. They don't really care about them. And I don't, like I'm not trained as a therapist or anything, but I like the students to know that I care how they're feeling today, and I'll ask questions at the beginning of class, like provide 2 words to describe how you're feeling today, just to get sort of a sense of how people are doing, and just little check-ins like that, but sort of connected to emotions, and try to get a sense of what's sort of going on with them, get to know them a little bit. And I think that can go a long ways for the students, where they do feel seen and cared for. And
tying this back to neurodiversity, so many times I've heard the comments like, again, like other students have told me, and I've experienced that firsthand, that you're lazy that you don't submit this, or this is a lousy writing, or this is a lousy submission, this is a lousy work because you have spelling errors, for example. Making assumptions that, like, that is the problem. Those assumptions that things are supposed to be, I don't want to call it perfect, even like my way. That is causing a lot of issue, because if we have someone who is in charge of a class that has this deep fundamental understanding that, like, oh yeah, some students are not good writers, that's fine, probably they are good artists, then we wouldn't have any problem, honestly, across the board. The issue is, like, we all assume that things should be certain way, and most of the cases my way, because again, like going back to like why the system is an issue, they got to this position because they were excellent writers. They were able to submit things on time, all of those things. I mean, in terms of like schedule and planning and going through like a linear progression of things, and like their linear problem solving skills. So that is, now they are in that position of power, and that's what they are demanding from their students. What if that student doesn't want to become next to you? Or what if that student doesn't want to become the next professor, want to become an engineer that is only involved in things that have to do something with art? I mean, how are you preparing them for that? Or even, what is your class preparing students for? Honestly, the most honest answer to that question is just to be able to get good grades in my final exam.
Get a high GPA. It makes me think that, I'm a deputy editor for the Journal of Engineering Education, and one of the things that has happened just recently in the last maybe 2 years, I'm bad with time, the last year or two, that we've started requiring, or not requiring, but encouraging authors to have positionality statements.
Very good
and
idea.
So to think about, and there have been some good articles to sort of reference for it, but to think about, like, what is your perspective and your background, and what lens do you use to sort of understand these things that helped you, and how did that influence the way you designed this research, and that influenced the way that you analyzed the data for the research or wrote it up, or that sort of thing. So how does it influence you as a researcher, on this project? So it's not just, here's my background and whatever, but this is how this sort of influenced me. Like, maybe we need that in classrooms, like, where faculty are like, this is my background, this is sort of where I came from. Like, I don't know, I
see
went
these
to
things through this lens.
I went to college, almost dropped out, picked a lot of different majors, ended up doing engineering, went straight through, got a PhD, went into a faculty position. And this influences me because I've done some work in industry, but like most of my work has been in academia. So it might be hard for me to see or to think about you as working in industry. I might be unintentionally sort of grooming you for academia or for graduate school, and to just be honest about it. So then students can be like, okay, not that they don't know, but just so you can have sort of a conversation. And then that would be a way that I could also start to be better about these things. So, okay, I don't know a whole lot about industry. Like, maybe I'll start engaging with the Industrial Advisory Board, or, like, whatever the different things are. Start thinking about, or start engaging with alumni from our programs, or whatever it is. Because I think we tend to we don't present that to students ever.
I love that idea, honestly.
Yeah.
This has layers of benefit. I mean, one is, hopefully students are critical enough to recognize how the person or what lens the person is seeing the world through. So that is a very important piece of information. But more important than that is exactly what you said, that like this is he or she is a human. I mean, this is a human.
Yeah.
It's not a robot. It's not a perfect robot. I mean, writing on the board and expecting me to. So that.
And maybe if you're out because you're sick, or you're out because your mom was sick and you're helping take care of them or something, and like, not to say that you have to disclose everything, but sharing that, you know, like, I'm sorry that I wasn't in class, you know, on Tuesday. It was because this happened, and, you know, I had to go take care of this, and family's really important to me, you know, or whatever. So then they also get to see modeling, like, professional behavior where people do care about family, and that you can, you know, you can take time off of work to go take care of these other things that are happening in your life. Because I think a lot of times we try to just make it where we're just the robots that you said. And this is what we do. This is my professional hat, and I'm not going to share anything about what's going on, you know, outside of the doors of this classroom. And I think sharing some of that stuff, and I don't know about you, but I've started sharing that I'll just almost make like offhand remarks. I'm like, this is my ADHD, or like, forgive me with this, you know, like there are things that I'm really good at and some things that I'm not great about, you know, but I'm working on it, you know, just trying to share some of those things so that the students start to see it, like you said, start to see us as the human beings that we are, and maybe can start seeing themselves in roles that maybe they hadn't considered for themselves, you know, previously.
So for the first few years I was teaching as an assistant professor, I used to be so self-aware of me making mistakes when I write on the board, spelling errors. To a point that I had my note in front of me and essentially copying and like paying attention to the spelling of the word. And at some point I was like, this is embarrassing. I mean, because the students, they think I'm copying things, and like that's not a good impression. And I started telling them that, oh, you know, I'm dyslexic. You know what if I write this with like one R or like one L, you know what I mean. I mean, just like correct it for yourself. I mean, and forgive me. I mean,
I'm not teaching a spelling class. I'm teaching whatever.
And the relief I felt myself. So I argue that, Nadia, this is also good for us, because, for example, imagine you're going through things. Again, like, we don't want to overshare, but imagine you're going through things and the energy is going to consume from us to look perfect in front of the class. It makes it multiple times more challenging to conduct ourselves or make sure we look perfect. I mean, what's the point of that? I mean, we can say like, I didn't sleep well last night, so I'm all over the place. What's the problem with saying something like that?
Yeah.
Or my kid was sick last night. I mean, like, sorry if I'm scattered. So.
Yeah. Or I'm worried about whatever. You know, my mind's not quite here right now. Yeah. So
these are practices that I think are, to really, when we talk about inclusivity, these are the things we need to talk about, honestly. And I don't know how willing and ready academia is to really go there.
Yeah. Because there is a certain amount of vulnerability in doing that. And, you know, we've been taught to be sort of the sage on the stage and just to, I don't know, vomit all these beautiful things and knowledge and whatever and impart that to the students. But by being ourselves, and probably a lot of us have also experienced imposter syndrome and have felt like we didn't belong because the system wasn't set up for people like us. And sometimes what we do to sort of fight that is like be overly arrogant and confident, you know, appearing confident, but maybe not actually being confident. So bringing that vulnerability into the classroom, into our interactions with graduate students or with peers, it would be a big change. Like that would be moving towards more institutional change. But you do wonder how we could get there. Like I'm trying to think of some of the colleagues and stuff that I've had over the years. Like I don't know, but maybe just a few of us can start pushing the boundaries.
I think if that's nowadays I try to really follow my guideline now is I don't know where I heard it first time, but it's think globally, act locally. And so again, have a big picture in mind, but not worry about changing everyone. If I am in a position that I can do something differently, I do it that way. And if the message is right, it's going to be heard by others. They're going to see that and they're going to do that and they're going to follow that. Otherwise, I mean, like, I really gave up on the idea of convincing people to think certain ways or do certain things, because that doesn't work. I mean, like, all of this at the end of the day is that mindset shift. If they are looking at neurodiversity as a dimension of diversity or as a disability, that defines everything. That's why I take issues with this kind of special education perspective, because it's fundamentally built around pathologizing these variations. So and for diversity, actually, this is something I want to get your opinion now, because you're also the deputy director for JEE. Two of the recent papers we submitted recently, they asked us to replace neurodiverse students with neurodivergent students, because that's not a correct term. And I understand that linguistically neurodivergent is correct, but I take issues with that because that's another othering terminology, essentially. So all of what we are doing is to make sure that people understand these are natural dimensions of diversity. And using neurodivergent means that there is a normal and these people diverge from that normal. And I really do not like that. I think it's just like a kinder version of, I mean, they used to call it like even like mental disability, things like that. Even NSF has some of that in some of their documents, mental disability. What do you think about that?
I think language is always changing, and sort of discourse is always changing, and we're learning. And so I think you can push back. Like APA recently came up with it has some really good stuff around like not using biased language. And so they have, things around like gender, things like not using sex in place of gender. So not using male, female, but men, women, and non-binary. But they do have some guidelines which might be helpful. But then the other thing is that you can push back on the editors, and you do have some agency there. And so I've had papers, not for JEE, but a lot of times we don't capitalize white because we're trying to decenter the white people. And so it's for a reason. And so like I've had papers where there's like a footnote, and like we recognize that APA style says that we have to capitalize white, but we're choosing not to capitalize white for these reasons. And even going to the editor, or sometimes it's like a copy editor that'll come up with these things, and just pushing back on them and saying, no, this is the reason we're doing that. We can make a note in the paper if you'd like that, to that we can say that we understand that this isn't how we're supposed to use language, but this is the reason that we're choosing to do this, even if it's not grammatically correct or whatever. I think you do have some agency that I think I didn't realize.
I'm going to try it next time. I'll let you know how it goes.
Push back on it, because it's changing, and we're learning. And like for a long time we were using underrepresented students, underrepresented minorities, and now like we're always changing the way we talk about things, trying to not further marginalize people and trying to be better. So I think that needs to be a open discussion and dialogue and conversation. And sometimes you'll get these copy editors that are just like, no, this is what the rules are. Like, no, we don't have to follow the rules. Not like if it's an accident, then yes, we should be grammatically correct.
To hear that
if it's a typo, we should change it. But if it's not, then I think we can push on those things.
So I'm cognizant of your time. Is there anything that we had to talk about or you wanted to share with us before I ask my concluding questions?
Maybe there's one more thing just to sort of follow on to the conversation we were just having. The idea about like making change or sort of institutional change. So one of the projects we just got funded is called Gather, but we're creating this community of transformation for people who are change agents within their departments or their institutions. And we're trying to use storytelling and like future storytelling and thinking about speculative storytelling with different types of really engaging on narratives and stories to help us imagine a different future and to help support us and support each other as we engage in these really, really difficult missions or goals that often we don't succeed at. And so it can be easy to be like, okay, I'm just not doing that. But how can we all support each other, at different institutions and in different places? And so maybe that is something that like you and I and others can do, is that we can, through things like this podcast, but maybe other community events, like we'll be together at ASCE, but to help sort of support each other as we're on this journey of pushing on the boundaries and making changes. That might be an idea or something for people to think about.
Yeah, I would love to do what I can. I mean, definitely let me know how I can take part. That's exactly
how we can support each other.
It's I mean, again, like going back to the power of stories, I just believe that, again, like as engineers, we completely undermine that. At some point, we forgot the power of that, and we have to start thinking about it again, because it's just so powerful to re-engage a lot of people that they think they're not seen, they're not heard.
Stories and emotions, yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. So I typically end this by asking two questions. One is what your advice would be for 13, 12 years self in middle school, or what you wanted to know at that point and you didn't know.
I don't know. I mean, maybe it would be that, that like things will be okay. Because like when you're, I don't know, middle school in particular, it seems like it was sort of a hard time. But it's like, I don't know, things will be okay. Be kind, love others, have others love you, try to create community. And I think there's a stress about like that you're going to make some mistake and it'll sort of mess up the rest of your life. But it's like, you'll make choices, and they might influence the outcome or your journey, but it's really just a compass. Point yourself in the north direction, and just trust that it'll be okay. Sort of lead with compassion and kindness, and things should be fine.
Well said. How about for Nadia when she was in college?
Maybe it would have been that it's okay to have a lot of different interests and different passions, that you can make that work, that you don't have to drill down into one thing and become an expert at one thing in particular. Even if you are, an engineering student or are in this specific lab or this specific thing, like you can gain expertise there, but you can also still be yourself and explore other things that make you happy, and do your skydiving or whatever, trapeze or whatever the things are that come up.
Would you suggest college-age Nadia to follow her passion?
Yeah, for sure. Which I think you're right. I think that is what I ended up doing, except for maybe engineering wouldn't have been the passion, but it worked out.
I think it always works out, probably.
Yeah, it just is what it is.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was very insightful. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.